So if the Catholics are correct about this, the site where I'm seated right now, this window facing today the Muslim Dome of the Rock, this site once faced the site of the Jewish temple, and the site itself here was the place of the trial of Jesus. Shalom everyone, and welcome to another vlog by Danny the Digger, and this time, continuing my quest of following Jesus in Jerusalem, I am trying to spot the place where Jesus was sentenced to death, the site of his trial. Let's go. So this site indeed is, by a medieval tradition, the location of the trial of Jesus, the site of the Praetorium. The Praetorium is the name of the site of the trial given to us by the New Testament. The question is, where is it? And Josephus doesn't tell us of any site called Praetorium, but it tells us that north of the temple, in the northern edge of the Temple Mount, was a giant fortress called Antonia. And I'm going to try now and risk my gear in order to show you something very interesting and significant about this location. It is on top of a very high part of bedrock. Here we go. Okay, taking the camera through the rails here and hoping not to drop it. You can see that this building is actually on top of a very high wall whose lowest parts there are bedrock. And bedrock is important because bedrock means it has always been there. Maybe there was more of it, but there was never less of it. Let me correct myself, the angle now. And this is one of the arguments in favor of placing here a giant fort formed by King Herod, so he could monitor the Temple Mount from its northern end, a fortress that is documented by Josephus, and it was called the Antonia. It was named so because the head of the Roman Empire in the east at the time was Mark Antony, which Herod wanted to flatter to show his alliance and his loyalty to. And we have here also a cat who's too shy to talk. Hey kitty kitty. Now, today this site, believe it or not, the possible site of the trial of Jesus is actually a Muslim boys' school. It's called Omariya. And the oldest remains that one can see here today go back to the Ottoman period. Is this building is kind of a governmental structure from the Ottoman times. And some say that this is all a continuous mistake to suggest that this is all a place of governorship and also the place of the trial of Jesus. But you know what? Usually I trash the traditions of the Crusaders. I think that in this case, they actually got it right when they were the ones to suggest that this is the site of the trial of Jesus, and this is from where his path to his execution site began, the Via Dolorosa. This is actually the first station of the Via Dolorosa, the Stations of the Cross, and every Friday the Franciscan monks will convene here with followers and will start the Friday procession. This is definitely going to be a subject I will cover, both the procession and an archaeological analysis of the Via Dolorosa. But first we need to acknowledge on where the trial was. And today there's absolutely nothing here that relates to the first century except for the bedrock that I showed you before. The Muslim Arab school here actually favors figures like Salah ad-Din, the Ayyubian leader that expelled the Crusaders out of the Holy Land. He is a hero in the Muslim world. But if we want to focus on the Christian heritage around here, we need to step out. And here is this amazing combination. On one hand it says it's the Omariya School of Boys governed by the municipality of Jerusalem, but above it you see that disc with the digit 1. indicating this is the site of the first station, the site of the trial and the condemnation of Jesus. If we step out of the school, then we start seeing both more Christian contents and more archaeological contents. And I want to focus right now on the complex over here, which marks the second station, the place of the condemnation, flagellation of Jesus, and giving him the cross that he will carry to the site of his execution. Archaeologically speaking, there's actually very interesting evidence also at that part. You see this big arch. This arch is called Ecce Homo. Here is the man. As by Christian tradition, this is the site. Underneath this arch, underneath that arch, Christian tradition says, is where Jesus was shown to the public, Pilatus saying, here is the man, and eventually he is condemned to death. I'm not sure if this is really where Jesus was presented to the public, for reasons I will explain when we film there. But it is a site with significant archaeology, which I will discuss in the next chapter. For now, we are asking of the place of the trial of Jesus, and this humble-sized church, another designed by the brilliant Italian architect of the Franciscans, Antonio Barluzzi, is saying to mark the end of the trial. In the trial itself, Jesus is condemned to death because of what? Not totally clear, but it is the claim that he's bringing the kingdom of heaven that could have given the excuse to Pilatus to sentence him to death. Because from a Roman point of view, I'm sorry, my friend, there's only one earthly kingdom. That's us, the Roman Empire, told him Pilatus. If you are claiming to bring any other kingdom, earthly, heavenly, I don't care. You are a rebel from Roman point of view, and it's an immediate death sentence. And in addition to this, we know from the text that Pilatus also put a crown of thorns over his head. In my opinion, it was to mock him for claiming to bring the kingdom of heaven. So here, my king, have a crown, he probably told him with a bit of sarcasm. And look at the design over the entrance. Barluzzi deliberately designed here a relief that presents the crown of thorns to suggest that this is the place. What does the interior look like? Here we go. I'll zoom to the better camera. Frankly, it's a very modern, very Barluzzi, very Italian style of chapel. On the floor, you have here an inscription indicating its date. Custodia Franciscana Terra Santa Annus Domine, and the numbers correlating with 1929. Okay, the 20s to the 50s is when Barluzzi did most of his works. And this small chapel has a few elements that tell the story. The story is that Pilatus, the governor, the perfectus of Judea, placed there on the left, is introduced by people for trial on that day. One of them is Barnabas. But as the crowd asks, according to the text, Barnabas is released. And Jesus, on the other hand, Jesus is sentenced to death. What's amazing is that if you look above on the ceiling, I hope I can get this into the frame, what do we see? We see that the inner side of this dome is actually showing the crown of thorns, like coming from above, coming from the heaven, to be placed on the head of Jesus, and you can see the blood slipping on the sides. This is where Jesus was condemned to death. This is at least what this chapel is sanctifying. Archaeologically, what can we say about this? I'm sorry. There's nothing here that dates to antiquity in general, not just to the first century. This chapel is very modern. However, on the opposite side, you have some items of interest. First of all, in the courtyard itself, it's worth noticing some tombstones that date to Roman and Byzantine times. It took me a while to get a translation of those inscriptions and the information about them. One of them is actually coming from Beirut. So there are no great significance for the story of the trial of Jesus, nor is this element, which is probably part of an industrial Byzantine period olive press. Very interesting, but not totally relevant. And a different chapter will be devoted to an archaeological museum here of the Franciscans that is all devoted to Christian sites. Yes, the Franciscans are very active in digging archaeological sites. They just recently renovated this place. Here you see the SBF archaeological collection. And perhaps because the pandemic is still not over, they're using the opportunity to continue the development of this museum. So when it will reopen, you can bet that Danny the Digger will present an archaeological review of the contents. And now let us continue to the other side of this courtyard, which has some more archaeological information. Does it prove that this is the site of the trial? Well, let's see. First of all, here we have bedrock. Bedrock is quite interesting. And you know what? I will devote a different chapter to the Ecce Homo Church and the area around it known as the Litos Stotos, the paved street. We are told in the Gospel of John that at the end of the trial, Jesus is presented on a paved stone street. And the more famous part of the Litos Stotos is behind this wall in a different compound. But also this chapel has some original Roman period pavement. In fact, it even has here a little drainage channel, and there is an underground pool beneath us, which I hope to record in the chapter about the Litos Stotos. You even have here a game board, two of them, 1 and 2. The one on the right is clearly a game board of a game whose rules are known to this day. It's called the Nine Men's Morris. You can Google it. It's a very simple game where you have to put 3 in a row to get the opponent's pieces off the table. But it's actually pretty sophisticated and requires a good share of tactics. The claim is, as this image is showing, that on this paved road, Jesus walked. In fact, this is the very place where Jesus, stepping out of the trial, is given the cross that he will carry to the site of his execution. And the stairs that are presented here in the relief, by local tradition, were found by Helena Augusta, the empress of the 4th century. And being so excited at that discovery, she gave an order to pull them out. Maybe they were originally placed here, but she gave an order to pull them out and take them to Rome. And if you want to see them, you need to go to Rome, to the church of Scala Santa. Here is maybe the other place which marks on where those steps were located. Now, recently science provided a very interesting insight to the holy stairs at the church of Scala Santa. After centuries that it was covered by wood, the Catholic Church opened the wooden cover, and lo and behold, beneath it there were stairs of stone, but marble. And every local archaeologist knows that in the days of Jesus, marble was not yet introduced. If there was a stone set of stairs, it should have been from the local limestone like this. So I'm sorry, I don't think that the Church of Scala Santa holds any Jerusalemite first century stairs. That's what science seems to indicate. The question is this from the time of Jesus? Did Jesus walk on these very stones? Well, the local Catholic tradition claims so, as this is the beginning of the Via Dolorosa. But in my next chapter, I will enter the Litostrotos site of the Sisters of Zion in Jerusalem, and will examine more evidence of this paved stone, and will try and reach conclusions. And then we will follow the stations of the cross all the way to the site of the execution. Here is now a model that is presenting what Jerusalem may have looked like in the days of Jesus, or shortly after, if to be more correct, and what was the path that Jesus walked when he was driven from the place of the trial to the site of the execution. Here we go. This is the Temple Mount. And of course, I've reviewed this in much greater detail in the first century model of Jerusalem at the Israel Museum. Just check out one of my previous chapters. But here is just a repetition. This model is showing similar image of Jerusalem to what the model in the Israel Museum. Minor changes, but here's the temple, Pool of Siloam, Petris the Pools, and the Via Dolorosa is from the Antonia, which is identified with the Praetorium, and I think it makes sense. I'll explain it in a minute. And then the Golgotha, the site of the execution, the crucifixion, is right over there. Now here's a puzzling question, and I'd like to conclude this review. Let me just put this down. Okay, one final interesting question is, wait, I want to be able to see you. Where did the trial take place? And again, we do have a problem with the fact that the text in the New Testament tells us it was at the Praetorium, but Josephus, nor the Mishnah, nor any other source mentions such a site. Josephus does mention Herod's palace next to Jaffa Gate, and Antonia right over here. And it seems that in the Byzantine period, they favored the assumption that it took place in Herod's palace. It was really the Crusaders who started saying, no, it happened here, and the Stations of the Cross to this day are from this point. And most of the time, we know the Crusaders mess up all the traditions. But perhaps this time they got it right. Why do I suggest this? And I must say, this is an insight I heard from one of the shopkeepers here. He said, Danny, the events are happening just before Pesach, or during Pesach, during the first day of Pesach. It's a time of tension. It's a time of loads of people on the Temple Mount, and some of them might use it to rebel against Rome. Pilatus wants to be on guard. He wants to be at the place where he can monitor the Temple Mount and take action if something takes place. And since no action was needed, he was seeing people on trial, and it happened to be on that morning the trial of two thieves and one guy claiming to be the Messiah. You know what? It does make sense. It really makes sense that Pilatus on that specific day would actually be here and not reusing Herod's palace. Of course, the truth will be revealed when we have time machines or something like that. But it is an interesting assumption, which I think it just makes a lot of sense. So, I hope you've enjoyed this review. Stay tuned, because the next chapters, you know what, let me show you a little snapshot of it. The next chapter is going to be taking you to the adjacent compound of the Sister of Zion convent in Jerusalem, and going underground in order to track the archaeological remains beneath the convent and connected also to the big arch that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. The arch of Ecce Homo. And then from here we will start heading southwest, about 300 meters walk to the site that is identified with the Golgotha, Skull Hill, the place of the execution of Jesus, and the site next to it, which would be his burial. This is perhaps the climax of this series, the climax of every Christian coming to the Holy Land. Nothing compares to coming and seeing the empty tomb. Of course, as an archaeologist, I will be asking, wait, what does archaeology have to say about all of this? Is it really a tomb from the 1st century? Aha! So stay tuned, because more good stuff is showing up. And of course, hit subscribe. Wait, let me switch to selfie mode. Hit subscribe and hit like if you want to make sure that you are notified of the next chapters that will be uploaded to my YouTube channel. And if you're in a generous mood, I wouldn't mind some financial little contribution, as these are hard times for anyone dealing with tourism. Actually, for 2 years I haven't had any real activity guiding tourists, but it is what it is. So God bless you all. Be taught.